Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We have 79 people registered, so we think everyone will be signing on shortly. So thank you to everyone for signing on tonight. Just to let you know, we are recording this session, so put on your best smile when you get on the screen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Melanie Cook McCant, and I am the CEO of Veritas Management Group. VMG is an Atlanta-based consulting company providing public health and other services to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and other public and private corporations throughout the United States. We have 53 employees, many of whom are on this call tonight or will be joining us later. I see now we have Desi LaPoule, our Zoom master, Chris Lassiter, one of our HR managers, Pamela Cook, a Blue Elephant, who is a senior project manager, our corporate chaplain, and one of our policy writers. We also have joining us tonight Linda Williams, Cynthia Morris, graduate of Spelman, and Dr. David Sleet and Nicole Caguisa. One of our core services at VMG is health communications. So we were very excited to sponsor this program tonight as a community conversation. As a public service to address all of the issues and concerns related to vaccine hesitancy in our communities. You may be asking yourself, what is a blue elephant and why are we here tonight? Blue elephants are all members of Delta Sigma Theta who graduated from Spelman College, whether you pledged Delta at Spelman or after you graduated. Spelman's colors are blue, and elephants are a very special symbol to members of Delta Sigma Theta, so hence blue elephants. I pledged Delta at Spelman in 1985, and I graduated from Spelman in 1987. Tonight's event actually grew out of a conversation I started on one of our Facebook groups, asking doctors and other professionals to come together to answer some of the many questions that a lot of us had about, should we take the vaccine? Is it safe? What will I be fired if I don't take the vaccine? There are just a number of questions that we were having in private conversations, and we just thought it was a good idea to bring together our community, our friends, our family, and have this conversation. So we were very lucky to have a very stellar primary guest speaker tonight and a group of experts to address all of your questions. But now I would like to turn over the floor to Dr. Nicole Evans Ross, Blue Elephant.
Thank you, Melody, for that warm welcome. Just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. This is a great cause that we are exploring and things that we need to sort out as a community. And I'm so glad that we're starting this with the Blue Elephant community. Why are we here tonight? Because we all have one goal in mind, and that is to bring this pandemic to a halt. In order for us to do that, we all must be vaccinated nationally and globally. And therefore, we have some experts that will serve as panelists tonight, and we will have a great speaker. And I am going to introduce the panelists. And first, we have Melanie Grant Jones. Melanie, will you introduce yourself and just say what you do? Take yourself off mute, Melanie. And also, please, will you say when you pledge?
All right, great. Hi, everyone. Melanie Grant Jones. I was Melanie Grant at Spelman. I graduated 1987. I pledged spring 85 Eta Kappa chapter. And Melanie is my line sister. It's going to get confusing, Nicole. I'm Grant, she's Cook, but good luck.
We'll get through it. We'll get through it. And what do you do, Melanie?
I work with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. I am an employment attorney with them. I've done employment law for probably 30 years. The views that I'm giving tonight when I speak will be the views of my own. They are not the Securities and Exchange Commission. They are just personal views that I have.
Awesome. All right. We also have Dr. Nicole Franks. Take yourself off mute and please introduce yourself and when you pledged as well, Nicole.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Franks. I pledge Spring 94 Eta Kappa chapter. I am an emergency physician and I am the Chief Quality Officer at Emory University Hospital Midtown.
Awesome. And I pledged in Spring 90 Wall Street, and my line sister, Laura Morse, is also on the panel.
Hi, thank you, Nicole. I love my line sister. I am Laura Morse, and I pledged 1990 Wall Street, and I am a licensed professional counselor in private practice in Atlanta, Georgia. You'll hear more about mental health and wellness from me later on this evening.
Awesome. And we also have Dr. Kimberlyn Richards.
Hello, I'm Kim Richards. I'm Dr. Kimberlyn Richards. I am board certified in internal medicine and in addiction medicine. I am in private practice here in Atlanta. I graduated from Spelman in 1985. I pledged to fall 81 at Eta Chi at UNLV, but I have been adopted by Eta Kappa when I transferred in 1983 and recognize I am actually part of, I recognize myself and they have adopted me in part of NET 31 through their line.
Awesome. Awesome. I'll turn it back over to you, Melanie. You're on mute, Melanie.
Thank you, everyone. As you can see, we have quite a few very stellar people in our community that can answer any questions you have about employment, mental health, the COVID vaccine, just a number of things related to COVID. So thank you all for taking out time. So I have the pleasure of introducing our star tonight, Dr. Jayne Middlebrooks Morgan. Dr. Jayne. Dr. Jayne Middlebrooks Morgan is a blue elephant. She pledged Delta at Spelman in 1982 and graduated from Spelman in 1984. Dr. Morgan is a cardiologist and the clinical director of the COVID task force at Piedmont Healthcare Corporation here in Atlanta. Dr. Morgan's roles have also included serving as Assistant Director of Innovation at Piedmont Healthcare and Director of Cardiovascular Research. She has also served as the Chief Medical Officer of the American Chemistry Council, Assistant Professor of Medicine at the Cleveland Clinic, and currently she is an adjunct clinical assistant professor of medicine at our brother school, Morehouse School of Medicine. It gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce my Delta big sister, Dr. Jayne Middlebrooks Morgan. Jayne, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Welcome. I appreciate the welcome from everyone, and nice for everybody to be here on a Sunday night. You know, you never know who will show up and what the interest is, and so we've got a lot of work ahead of us with regard to sort of this COVID vaccine and what does that mean for our community. Certainly, this COVID vaccine represents an intersection of the United States government, healthcare system. And when we look at what our relationship is with research as well, this vaccine then represents that trifecta of a healthcare system in which we really don't have a trusting relationship We have the United States government, where we also have an uneasy relationship. And then really the world of research, where traditionally we really have no relationship whatsoever because of our past historical atrocities. And so this vaccine encompasses all three of those, plus a new complicated medical platform of messenger RNA that with which people are not familiar. Even really people in the medical community have to really think about what's the difference between RNA and DNA. We've got to think about that. And so then it should be no surprise that we have a low uptake, and there's vaccine hesitancy, which is what they call it. But really what it is vaccine neverency. We are in a community where this is not a trusted source, and we want to try to understand where we are with that. And so if we give some historical context, we can start with the father of gynecology, Dr. James Marion Sims. And he was so named the father of gynecology because he developed a procedure that corrected fistulas in women. And fistulas are small holes that shouldn't be there, that connect the vagina to the rectum or the vagina to the urethra, should not be there, cause a lot of discomfort, infections. He developed a procedure that would correct that. And he was lauded as the father of gynecology because he restored so much quality of life to women. But when we dig into his past, we see that he developed these procedures by practicing on Black women who came in, who had no advocate, and they had no say-so over their bodies. And he did surgical procedures on them. And I'm calling them procedures, but they were surgery, including removing tissue, cutting things out, sewing things back together inside of these women. They were never, ever allowed any anesthesia, ever. Screaming, writhing on these tables. They were shown no mercy. One woman in particular underwent 30 or 40 procedures. I'm saying procedures, but we're talking about surgeries. After he had practiced over 100 procedures and perfected this procedure without anesthesia, he rolled it out. And it benefited white women who, of course, underwent this perfected procedure under anesthesia. We finally were successful in having the bronze statue that was erected of him in New York removed in 2018. So when we roll out something of the COVID vaccine, there is no surprise that we are in the predicament that we are in. Why is it we don't want to step up and take this vaccine? So let's take a look at the vaccine, if we will. Vaccine began development, as far as we could see, in 2020. But when we really look back onto the history of the SARS virus, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, that's the name of this virus that causes COVID-19. What scientists realize is that it's named number 2 because we've seen this before. So where have we seen this? We saw this with the SARS outbreak in 2003, severe acute respiratory syndrome. So in those 17 years, there was a complete development of all the preclinical work, all of the bench work. That spike protein that you hear about, that spike protein had been identified in all 30,000 base pairs analyzed. We also had a second outbreak of MERS, the same family, Middle Eastern respiratory virus, that we were lucky that we didn't see it here. It was mostly contained in Saudi Arabia back in the days when we actually had an intact pandemic response team. But that virus was also of the same family. And so by the time we had our very first case of COVID-19 on our shores, all 17 years of that research came to bear. Messenger RNA technology began development really in the 60s, began earnest development in the 90s. One of the reasons that we could not use it is because it is unstable. It disappears quickly within your body. So that's one of the concerns when people ask about the virus. The messenger RNA, not only does it not change your DNA, it doesn't even stay within your body. It denatures very quickly. And so I often get that question as we are moving along. One of the things that I really try to always envelop into my talks is the role of clinical trials within the Black community and what clinical trials really mean for us. Every major medical device or drug that has come through FDA approval in this country has come through clinical trials. People who participate in those clinical trials are white males. So that data that we have that the FDA approves is the data that we have on white males. And so if you're someone like me, a cardiologist, certainly multiple examples in cardiology of drugs that were developed and approved. And once we start to prescribe them in our office, that's when we first began to hear of side effects and difficulties that our patients are having while they're on cruises, while they're at Disney World. And so we have to ask ourselves when we talk about being guinea pigs, on which end of the spectrum are we really guinea pigs? Are we guinea pigs at the beginning? And so we refuse to even participate in these trials? Or are we guinea pigs at the end where we haven't participated at all? And it's unclear whether any of the data is relevant to us. And when we are out in the real world, we're outside of a controlled research environment. That's the first time we're ever introduced to the compound. And that's the thinking that we need to begin to address and adjust. I would argue if you're not being offered a clinical trial and you have a chronic medical condition, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, multiple myeloma, cancer, and you're not being offered a clinical trial, then you're being treated optimally by your medical physician, meaning you're being treated to the absolute maximum of evidence-based medicine that is approved by the FDA, but you are not being treated maximally. Maximally is that therapy that's behind the curtain. Maximally is that therapy that white men access, the medicines of tomorrow. I'll give you an example. When Donald Trump became infected with COVID-19, 74 years old, overweight, sitting in the White House desaturating, oxygen levels dropping, he was in trouble. And it was clear to all physicians that he was in trouble as he was airlifted to Walter Reed, regardless of what his physicians came out to say as they presented that wall. Those with medical degrees understood those risk factors and that his oxygen levels were dropping. What happened when he arrived? He immediately received Regeneron's monoclonal antibody therapy. Most people said, what? We've never heard of it. You know why? Because it's not available outside of clinical trials. The only other people to ever receive Regeneron's monoclonal antibody therapy were any of the other patients who were enrolled in trials and nobody else. Donald Trump received it because they decided that his role was important enough that he qualified for emergency use authorization. That is platinum level healthcare. That single therapy is credited with saving his life, certainly with interrupting the downward trajectory. He got access to something that the rest of us do not have access to. That was a great example. Additionally, when we look at clinical trials, this is how we have an opportunity to close the gap in health equity. If you're enrolled in a clinical trial and you've got patients who are uninsured or underinsured, this is how they get covered. The drug companies cover them. The device companies cover them. Not only that, they have direct access to a nurse coordinator, a research coordinator, 24 hours. There's a physician that oversees them. There's a regional physician that oversees that doctor. There's a national physician that oversees the regional physician. You have an entire team of people that are invested in your outcome. And anything that happens to you, you can contact them 24 hours a day. Do any of us have healthcare access like that? That right now we can pick up the phone right now and tell somebody that our stomach hurts or that we have a nosebleed and they're going to act on it. None of us. And we're sitting here as doctors, but that's the care that you get within clinical trials. So when we look at these COVID vaccines, not only should we be participating and stepping up to receive these vaccines, and I want to go into the data later, just a minute, but we should also be thinking that Moderna and Pfizer have been the first two vaccines developed. In the pharmaceutical world, we call that first to market. They have been in that enviable position of being first to market, but they may not end up being best in class. There are 135 drug companies developing COVID vaccines as I give this lecture. 135. I suspect that what will happen once all is said and done, that we probably will have multiple COVID vaccines for multiple platforms. One will be better for children. One might be better for the elderly. One might be better for people with heart disease. One may be better for people who don't have access to refrigeration, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, if we don't participate in these trials, what we don't know is which one is better for us. That's what we won't know. When we look at Moderna and Pfizer, we are 13.4% of the population, African Americans. Moderna enrolled 10.3% African Americans in their trial, and Pfizer enrolled 9.3%. Even though they fell short of what our representation is in the United States, they actually did a very good job, because generally we participate in clinical trials at less than 4 or 5%. They were incredibly intentional in trying to recruit African Americans into these trials. When I dig further into these FDA briefing documents, and I've read them numerous times, when we look at the multiple subpopulations, and I specifically look at the African American population, we are the only subpopulation within both trials to have zero, and I mean none, zero incidences of COVID-19 2 weeks following the second dose. We were the only group to have no COVID-19 infections following the second dose in both the Pfizer and Moderna trials. 100% efficacy in the African American population, 95% efficacy overall. Some other group pulled us down, but the Blacks were at 100%. So we need to think about that when we are talking about whether we're going to participate or not. They were not perfect, but they did a pretty good job. Now, where did they fall short? And you know, maybe some of you, I wrote an article very critical of Moderna because they did fall short. When we look at the pharmaceutical trials, they're divided into 3 phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. This is just general discussion. Phase 1 is where we derive all of our safety data. Before we even determine whether a compound will work, we first have to determine if it's safe. If it's not safe, it doesn't even advance further. So that safety data is where I was critical of Moderna, because they did their safety trial with only 2 Black people in them. There were 3 doses. Both Black people were in the same dose. So we have no information on the other 2 doses. And it just so happens the 2 doses that the Black people were not in were deselected. So we do have information on the dose that was finally selected and went forward to FDA emergency use approval. But here's my question. We don't know if the other doses were better for us because we didn't participate. They were deselected without us ever participating. So that's why I wrote the article critical of Moderna, and Pfizer was even worse. They had 0 Black people. They selected their dose on safety data with no Black people in their phase 1 trials. Now, phase 3, when we talk about they enrolled 30 and 40,000 people, and we had 10.3% Blacks and 9.3% Blacks, that's great. That's that big efficacy data, and we did well in there, but that may not have been the outcome because we don't know of the doses that were deselected what our profile was because we did not participate. The other question that I get is with regard to comorbidities. I hear a lot about, I've got chronic medical problems, Dr. Morgan, and, should I get the COVID vaccine? When we look at comorbidities, this group of comorbidities, meaning chronic medical conditions that you're managing, while the trials did not specifically study all chronic medical conditions. In fact, they didn't really study any chronic medical condition. They also didn't exclude any. So all comers were there. For example, chronic lung disease, 1,448 patients were included in the Moderna trial. Significant cardiac disease, 1,483 patients. If you were obese, almost 2,000 patients. And if you were overweight, almost 2,000 patients. And if you were obese and overweight, that whole group, almost 10,000 people were in there. We talk about cancers of any kind at all, almost 1,400. Hypertension, almost 9,000 participants had hypertension. HIV, 176 patients. Diabetes, almost 3,000. They did not specifically study these diseases in these trials, but they did not exclude them either. And so when you look at this data includes all of these chronic medical conditions. And these are the people that we really want to focus on to get these vaccines, because what we know is that if you are managing a chronic medical condition and you contract COVID-19, your complication rate is higher. Your hospital course is more treacherous. In cardiac disease, if you have underlying heart disease and contract COVID-19, you are 6 times more likely to be admitted to the hospital. And once you're admitted to the hospital, you are 12 times more likely to die. Who has heart disease? We have heart disease. Why wouldn't we step up and get this COVID vaccination? So these are the kinds of things that we need to begin to think about when we think about, how are we going to even approach clinical trials in the future, what that means for our families, what that means for our patients, what that means for people who are uninsured and underinsured. Can we get them access to clinical trials? Doctors, Black physicians need to develop relationships with these big medical centers. Moderna, Pfizer, other big companies need to begin to recruit and train Black physicians as principal investigators, because 80% of African Americans in this country are seen by Black physicians. And that is not by happenstance. So Black physicians have a lot of power. The number one reason for people of all races to enroll in a trial is that they are approached by a trusted physician. So if we don't get our physicians involved in research and trained as principal investigators, it's very hard to continue with that trusted relationship to bring people into clinical trials. And so all of that comes full circle with regard to where we are with the COVID vaccine, why there are so many questions. I've answered the question about the time of development. I've answered the question about what was our representation. I've answered the question about comorbidities in the trial. And so, as we go on, there will be increasingly more and more questions, but we need to begin to understand what is our responsibility and not forget Tuskegee. We should never forget the Tuskegee experiment. I don't even know if we should forgive it. So I will say for certainly, we should never forget. We should never forget James Marion Sims, but we have to understand the context in which we live today and how we're going to begin to address health equity issues for our families. And as physicians, how we're going to begin to address that for our patients as well. So I will stop there. If there are specific questions on COVID-19, I will leave time to answer specific questions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Morgan. That is such valuable information. We can tell that you're passionate about it and that you are living in the environment where you know what you're talking about, you know the facts, You understand the trials. And we just appreciate having you in position to be able to come back and report the truth to us. And we had a question that said, where else have we seen mRNA technology used in medicine?
So in vaccines, we have not seen it before. So this is the first time we have seen it in vaccines. And something that I will say that we should take particular pride in and think about, I'm actually writing an article now about it. Vaccines actually came to America by an African slave named Onesimus. Onesimus arrived here in 1706 after he was captured in Africa, arrived on a slave ship, and was bought by a church group who wanted to give their minister a present. They bought this young teenager and presented him to a guy named Cotton Mather. If that name is familiar to you, that's because the minister, the Reverend Cotton Mather, was the one who was the main inciter of the Salem witch hunts. So he now owned this slave that he named Onesimus. Smallpox was the big virus of the time. In 1721, Boston saw its biggest epidemic of smallpox, and Onesimus told his master about this process called variolation that they practiced in West Africa, where they took some of the pus from the active pustules from smallpox and rubbed it inside of wounds. Boston completely rejected it. The medical community completely rejected it because they could not understand that a cure or that a prevention could come from an African slave. But eventually he proved to be correct. The smallpox vaccine a few years later was developed from cowpox, and Massachusetts went on to be the very first state to identify the smallpox vaccine as a requirement. And as you may or may not know, smallpox went on to become the only disease in the world to ever be eradicated. Black people started that. Then we look at Mr. Frank McKinley Jones, who filed a patent in 1940, another Black man who filed a patent to develop transportable refrigeration. That refrigeration helped us transfer plasma, food, supplies, all during World War II. But what else does it transport for us? It transports vaccines with cold chain requirements. The entire industry of refrigerating transportation grew out of his invention and his patent. He formed a company called Thermo King, and they developed refrigerated containers that go onto planes, that go onto trains, that go onto ships. That's how we actually get our vaccines. And now we have Dr. Corbett, born in Hurdle Mills, North Carolina in 1986, who's the co-lead developer of our messenger RNA platform for Moderna. Black people are bringing you these vaccines, not only scientifically, but literally bringing you the vaccines in refrigerated context. So we need to also understand and appreciate that.
Awesome, Jayne. That is such helpful information. I think, it takes us to the quote that those who do not know their history are doomed to repeat it. So I think a lot of African Americans are feeling like they are separate from this vaccine creation, that we are used to being guinea pigs, so they just don't trust that we're a part of the process. I can I do understand it, quite frankly. I mean, it makes sense that we are hesitant to take the vaccine. I think so. Information that you're providing is very helpful in us understanding that we have a history in solving problems in medicine that's just been glossed over. But we have a question that says, are medical trials ongoing? And if so, how can we get involved in one?
Right. So great question. And there are a couple of companies that are working to develop this platform. And I'm working as a consultant with a couple of them. So it's not up and running yet. So for now, what we would do is you need to, identify and contact your local medical centers, which you can just do online, and look up all of the regional trials. They will have all of their trials listed there. The other place you can go is ask your physician that you're interested in trial. I have diabetes. I really wouldn't mind being enrolled in a trial to see if I can help not only my diabetes, but also help advance science, but also get access to medicine, or maybe even get access to healthcare if I don't have insurance. Your physician may, hopefully should be able to help you navigate that, even if what they are doing is also going onto the medical community websites and looking up trials such that they can refer their patients.
Awesome. Jay, can you also talk about the safety part of the vaccine? You know, a lot of folks are just very concerned that we're injecting something into our bodies and are not sure of the safety part. And I've heard people to say, ask me questions like, what if I'd like to just take my chances on getting COVID? You know, I'm wearing my mask and I just would prefer not to risk getting a side effect from the vaccine. I'll just take my chances.
Right. And you know, and that might work. You know, it's kind of like Russian roulette. The bullet might not be in the chamber. So I can't say that won't work. I will say that statistically, that's probably a poor plan. And what we need to look at is when we look at the safety data, we have all the safety data on all the side effects that would occur. So we know all the common ones: nausea, vomiting, fever, chills, headache, myalgias, you know, arm pain. But then there are others as well that people had. There were some women who developed some lymphadenopathy, where they had drainage in their lymph nodes. And then there's a concern, they're concerned that they may have breast cancer when this lump develops and it's really the draining lymph node. So there were a series of cases of appendicitis. There was a series of cases of Bell's palsy, which is paralysis of one side of your face. So there were some other side effects that were rare, but they did occur. They were not reported in the major findings that went out because they were not common. But I'll give you an example. When we look at Bell's palsy, which is paralysis of one side of the face, when we do clinical trials, you have two arms. I'm just going to make it, you know, very basic. There will be two arms. One is the active arm where people are actually getting the vaccine, and the other is the placebo arm or the dummy arm where you're actually getting a sugar pill or something. You're not getting the vaccine. You don't know which one it is. When they looked at both groups were developing Bell's palsy at the same rate. So the question is the vaccine responsible for this, or is this just the normal incidence of Bell's palsy that we might expect in a population of 70,000 people, because it occurred in both our vaccine group and both our placebo group? So it's unclear. The same for appendicitis as well. And so I think we can be confident in the data that was presented that this vaccine is safe. It certainly has a profile very similar to the flu vaccine, which we take every year. The safety profile is very similar to those.
Awesome. There are also other very terrible misinformation, pieces of misinformation on social media. I personally would recommend that you get your information from a reliable source. So joining us tonight is a great idea. But if you look at certain parts of social media, Twitter, some things on Facebook, you really could be scared, you know, unnecessarily, because they're talking about severe allergic reactions, infertility, DNA being altered, and of course, Bell's palsy. There was even a nurse on video sending around a video of herself with Bell's palsy, recommending that people not take the vaccine. It was quite terrible. What would you say to them, Jayne?
Yeah. So I would invite you all to find a credible source, and I invite you all to follow me at Dr. Jayne Morgan on Instagram and on Twitter. I post something called Stairwell Chronicles. It's also on my personal Facebook page, if you guys, and my personal Instagram page, and on LinkedIn. I actually developed this series for LinkedIn where I do 1-minute videos and I answer a question on COVID vaccines in under 1 minute on a video. And you can spend 1 minute and listen to the answer to one question and know that it's coming from a credible source. The only caveat that I will add to that is that this landscape moves so quickly that sometimes information can be outdated. If I did the video 2 months ago and you're listening to it today, the information may be different. So it's not that I'm trying to mislead you. That was the best information in January. Now it's April. Here's information for April. And I'll give you an example of that. I think we were discussing, there's discussion regarding whether or not we should get 1 shot or 2 shots, whether there needs to be a 3rd shot. So, if I did a recording earlier talking about we need to follow the clinical trials. Clinical trials were done with a 2-shot regimen. That's the data that we have. We don't have data on a regimen that didn't include the 2nd shot. Now what they're discussing with multiple variants coming in is whether a 3rd shot will also be required to cover additional variants, because it's taken us so long to sort of develop public health measures and to get the vaccine going that now we have all of these variants out there, that there may be a 3rd shot. So if you were to listen to my video from a couple of months ago, I'm talking about 2 shots. If I did one in a couple of weeks, I might be discussing what the 3rd shot is. So you have to think about as well, the context of when you're listening. But I welcome all of you to follow me. Another place, obviously, go to accredited sites like the CDC. Get your information from the CDC website that goes out to, the entire world. And not so much on, from your neighbor or from your friends or that sort of thing, unless of course your neighbors are physicians and you trust that they're giving sort of, stable, analytical information and advice.
Absolutely. Well, Jayne, I think pretty much you've answered this question to me, but it is in the chat. And I just want to say, if you can choose, how should we decide which vaccine to take?
Mm-hmm. So I've done a video on this, but I'll recap. If we look at the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, they are very similar. They're both messenger RNA platforms. Moderna is given 2 doses 4 weeks apart. Pfizer is given 2 doses 3 weeks apart. Moderna reaches its 95% efficacy 2 weeks after that 2nd dose. So that's a total of 6 weeks if you're counting. Pfizer reaches its 95% efficacy 1 week after that 2nd dose, so 4 weeks. So if you were to do the Pfizer regimen, you have 95% coverage after 4 weeks. The Moderna regimen will take you another 2 weeks for coverage. If we look at the ingredients are also fairly similar. Along with the messenger RNA, we have lipids like polysorbitol, we have electrolytes or salts, sodium chloride, sodium phosphate, potassium chloride, potassium phosphate, and we have sugar, sucrose. So basically the emulsion is fats, sugar, and salt. That's in both of them. Moderna also has one additional ingredient called tromethamine, which they use to balance the acidity. Those are, in general, the biggest differences between the 2 vaccines, and those differences are negligible. They're just not enough. That's splitting hairs for it to have a preference of one vaccine over the other. They basically are the same. They are equitable. Their safety profiles were the same. Their efficacy profile, when I say the same, I mean fairly balanced. And so I would say if you have an opportunity to get one or the other, there is no reason to hold out for one or hold out for the other.
Awesome. I think that understanding, exactly how it works, the mRNA technology works, is something that I always thought of. Understanding that would help folks to know that this vaccine is not permanently placed in your body, that the mRNA is denatured, destroyed. I think it's very important to know that when after the mRNA creates this, reproduces this spike protein, which is its goal, that the spike protein is not permanently in your body either. you know, a lot of folks are just concerned about being permanently altered. And I think that you've helped us a lot, Jayne, to understand that these are, the vaccine is a temporary piece of mRNA that's placed in your body that is destroyed, but it has done a job by helping us create immunity.
Yeah, you did a great
And
job.
I'm sorry?
I said you did a great job. That was great.
Awesome. So, you know, I think that I will actually open it up to a few of the panelists as well. And I'm going to start with Dr. Richards and just, you know, we had a conversation about just, again, vaccine hesitancy and, you know, what it looks like from the outpatient medical standpoint and what she's seeing in her office about folks who want to sit on the sideline and not get the vaccine.
Thanks. Yes. So in private practice, my practice consists mainly of actually my practice is pretty much from adolescent to geriatric, but the large majority of my patients are anywhere between 25 and 40. And most of them are relatively healthy, or so they think. So with that population, you do have a lot of people who either think that when it first started and there was the internet rumor that it didn't affect young people, so that one really kind of put us in a position where we're telling everybody to wear masks, and they're saying, yeah, but they say that we're not going to get it. So we're not going to wear masks. We're fine. We're healthy. We're good. So as time has progressed, trying to have this type of conversation that with people as we talk about other things, well, the first thing that I do is in my practice, I have a mask required sign on my receptionist desk. So that kind of opens up the door to us to discuss it as they come back huffing and puffing because they have to put on a mask. But if you want to get your prescriptions, then you need to put on a mask. Well, as we have this conversation, you know, a couple of things that they do. They either say, A, I'm not going to get it, or B, everybody that I know that has gotten it has been fine, or C, I don't know. I had one person tell me, I know everybody. I've looked at the numbers and I know everybody in my county, and the numbers are inflated. So therefore, I don't believe that it's as bad as they say it is. So trying to debunk all the conspiracy myths and educate people first on just basic virology and how viruses actually mutate, and then explain to them why you can get it even though you may not have symptoms, and then you go home and you can spread it to anyone else. And just because you didn't have symptoms doesn't mean that the person that you spread it to will not. So having that conversation, and then also debunking the whole, well, you know, everybody heard about the nurse that had Bell's. Well, I don't want to get Bell's palsy. Well, as I tell them, when you look at think about this. As of today, 64 million doses of vaccine have been given. Okay, everybody heard about that one nurse that got the Bell's palsy. If you do the math, 1 out of 64 million, you got a better chance of winning lottery than you do of getting Bell's palsy. So if you think of it this way, nobody who gets the vaccine and goes about their business has time to either make a video or do anything else on the internet. You only hear about the bad outcomes because those are the ones that are disgruntled and upset, and those are the ones that are on the internet. But you have to remember that there are millions of people that are not on the internet, that are doing fine, that have gone on lives that nobody knows about. So these are the conversations that I'm having in my practice with my patients.
Yeah, that's great to hear, Kim. And one other thing that maybe you can add when we talk about this is that, you know, your patients who are resistant, when we look at long haul syndrome, and long haul syndrome are those patients who have had COVID, and months later, up to 9 months still, we are now, they still are having some symptoms. They still did not have a return to quality of life. These patients we initially thought were mostly our hospitalized patients. But what we see now is that it's 30% of all COVID positive patients, whether you were in the hospital or not, including if you were asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic and just at home quarantining. You can have long-term sequelae cutting across all races, all genders, all socioeconomic classes. These people have loss of taste or smell, but more concerning is that they have what they're terming as brain fog. They have periods of disorientation. It's difficult for them to return to work. They have difficulty with memory. And then more severe things, we have inflammation surrounding the heart that goes on and on and on. They're taking all types of steroids and immunosuppressant medications to try to control that. They have shortness of breath, mild shortness of breath, which is more severe when they try to get up and move. And it's much more pronounced, obviously, in patients who previously have been very active. They have not been able to return to their lives, and their course of COVID was very mild. They were at home simply quarantining, enjoying themselves, playing video games. And 9 months later, they're actually sicker than they were during their quarantine period. That's this long haul syndrome that is still poorly understood.
I will absolutely start to use that in my talks with them in terms of why to get the vaccine, and also why to get it quickly and not wait.
Yeah. Right. Both such great points. We have Nicole, Dr. Franks, who is primarily an emergency room physician and also the chief quality ex-officer at Emory. And, you know, Nicole, I have often heard the statement that African-American doctors are being paid extra to push this vaccine. We're getting some bonus to promote this vaccine. I've been offended by that statement, but you know, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about everything. Are you getting paid extra to promote this vaccine, Dr. Frank?
Absolutely not. As the bigger issue is, that is so interesting. It's actually the first time I've ever heard that. And I mean, if I had to total up the hours that I was putting in, it's really on the strength of my commitment to community service, not just as a physician, but as a Delta, as a Spelman graduate. But you know, why are we here talking? Why are Black physicians talking? Because the messenger matters. I will personally tell you that I was vaccine hesitant in the fall of 2020. I was completely distrustful of the speed of the vaccine coming to forward and how they were speaking about it. And it wasn't until it was in a forum much like this, a webinar, where Dr. Kizzy Corbett talked and explained the mRNA technology, explained Operation Warp Speed, that I understood. But it took the Black woman scientist, for me as a Black physician, to come on board. It didn't take long. it just took a period of me understanding the information. And so when I talk to people about the vaccine, I really have to gauge, is this an issue of logic for them or emotion in terms of their decision? If it's logic, it is as simple as really making sure they understand what's going on. Much like what Dr. Morgan broke down, from every aspect of how it's made, how it's delivered, what are the side effects. Most people just want the information and for you to meet them where they are and for it to come from a trusted source. But when it's an emotional decision, that's when it's most challenging. Okay, because you have to really dig into, well, what is behind the mistrust? What is behind their information source? What is behind the context of what they believe? And that's a longer and a more difficult conversation. So for those of you who are on this call, the way that we get through to the emotional folks is the additional influences in their family, in their communities, who say, no, it is okay. It is okay, where your pastor can appeal to you and help you understand. So there's so many, you can't get paid for this work because there's so many avenues that have to be addressed to get to folks because of our history of medicine that Dr. Morgan outlined. And we have to go at it from all. It takes a village is real in terms of us getting through this pandemic as well.
Yeah. I think there's a question in the chat that I can address under what's termed exceptional circumstances. So the CDC has identified what are known as exceptional circumstances under which you can receive these vaccines outside of how they were studied in the clinical trials. And there are two of them. One is if you need to mix the doses, you can start with Moderna and end with Pfizer, or start with Pfizer and end with Moderna if your patient meets the criteria for exceptional circumstances, which is up to you to decide. So for instance, in Texas right now, they have a deep freeze. I'm assuming there must be somebody there who couldn't get to their second shot. And by the time they get there, maybe they can only get to the Pfizer shot and not the Moderna, and they started with Moderna. That's an exceptional circumstance. They can move forward with doing that. The other exceptional circumstance is if you receive the first shot, but then you can't get that second shot in either 28 days for Moderna or 21 days for Pfizer. The CDC is now allowing up to 42 days from that first shot, recognizing that exceptional circumstances may occur. Someone gets hospitalized, someone's in a car accident, something happens. They are allowing up to 42 days because the CDC does want to encourage people to continue to get the vaccine. I suspect one of the concerns is, and we certainly saw the study that came out of Israel, and if not, I can talk about that one, but what the concern is that if we are partially immunized, that gives greater fodder for the virus to develop not only more mutations, but mutations specifically against the vaccine itself. So we want to encourage people to have two vaccines. Now, that being said, that's why I say the landscape moves quickly. Israel published just this weekend that after one dose of the Pfizer vaccine, when they looked at their population, they reached 95% efficacy after one dose. And so they are pushing, can we just give one dose of this Pfizer vaccine? So stay tuned for that. But that's where the landscape is moving. So if a patient, I think the question is, if a patient can receive the first shot, but they have nowhere to get the second shot, should they go on and get the first shot? I would say yes, go ahead and get the first shot because pharmacies are opening, other health places are opening, and you probably will be able to find that second shot, and you have 42 days to do it.
Awesome, that's great information. We also are having people who have had COVID-19 who are wondering, should they be vaccinated and when? Sometimes people believe that I've had COVID-19, I have the antibodies, I don't need to get vaccinated again. So we have a couple of bad pieces of information to sort through. And one is that if you've had COVID-19, you don't need to be vaccinated. That is not true. you need to be vaccinated. Then folks want to know when they should be vaccinated. Jayne, could you review that as well?
Yes, so and the landscape is changing on this. So I'm going to tell you where it is today and where it may be going tomorrow. So today, if your patient has had COVID-19, it is recommended that they still receive the vaccines, both doses of the vaccine. They don't have to rush to do it because we think that they have immunity for at least 90 days. But at some point during that 90 days, they should be COVID negative and asymptomatic. They should receive the vaccine and then move forward with the second vaccine as scheduled. Where the landscape is moving is that if a patient has had COVID-19, maybe they only need one shot because the disease itself serves as the first shot. And so maybe they only need a second shot for them, which is their first shot, which will serve as that booster to get them to 95%. So stay tuned. Currently, they should receive 2 shots. So at a very minimum, they should get 1. So we only understand that they have natural immunity for 90 days, and then they need to get the shot. If you are treated during the course of your COVID-19 disease with convalescent plasma or the monoclonal antibody therapy, Eli Lilly has one out now. If you are treated with either of those infusions as part of your therapy for COVID-19, then you may not receive the vaccines for 90 days after the date of that infusion. You must wait 90 days if you received either of those infusions, not both, either or, then you have to wait 90 days before you receive the first dose of your vaccine.
Excellent. That is such valuable information, since we all know that so many of us have had COVID-19 and our family members have had COVID-19 or have it now. But the other reason to make sure that you get vaccinated is to avoid being infected with these variants and to avoid the perpetuation of variant creation. You know, the longer it takes for us all to be fully vaccinated, the longer it's going to have the door open for variant creation. Is that correct?
That is true. And one thing that we probably don't realize is that at this point, the SARS-CoV-2 virus has mutated probably close to 3,000 times. And when we think about mutations, I think we think of something that's bigger, scarier, bad, or meaner. But really in science, mutation just means change. And oftentimes, actually, a virus can change itself out of existence. But sometimes it can change and become more effective at survival. And we have to remember that everything on Earth works to live. It works to survive. And so it is going to continue to change and learn and try to survive the same as humans are trying to survive. The mutations that have gotten all of the press, the one in the UK, the one in Brazil, the one in South Africa, these mutations have gotten a lot of press because the virus has changed in those mutations such that it is more infectious. So if you come in contact with it, you're more likely to get infected. The reason it becomes the dominant strain in the area is because it's more infectious, it's more successful. So it becomes the dominant strain. It can infect more people more quickly, so it takes over. The reason you see the death numbers increase is because the volume of people who are infected are greater. So then the volume of comorbidities and the volume of deaths are higher, but it's still unclear whether the percentage of deaths, in other words, it's still unclear whether these variants are more lethal or just more infectious. And whether we see more deaths is because we see more infections. But that being said, the United States is pointing its fingers at other countries and saying, South Africa has this variant, UK has this variant, Brazil has this variant. Do you know what percentage of variants that we have actually done genomic tracing on this SARS-CoV-2 virus that we've been in for a year in the United States? What percent with our pandemic team dismantled, have we done any genomic tracing on? I'll just tell you, 0.3%. Let's just let that sink in for a second. That means that we don't even know what we're exposed to. We're pointing our fingers at other countries. At least they know. They
Right.
have done the tracing and are identifying it. We don't even know what
Right.
we have. We have not done genomic tracing. We haven't even done 0.5%, 0.3.
Right.
So we don't really know what's the biggest and the baddest. And this is the part that they don't talk about. When we talk about all these other countries, well, the other countries at least are doing some genomic tracing. At least they know what they have. We don't
Right.
know what we have here.
Well, I think that you make a lot of good points there too. I think we are fortunate in that, sisters got out and we've got a new administration and we should pat ourselves on the back because we are pretty much helping to get better people in position to make this thing work better. I know with the CDC's changing of the guard, Dr. Walensky, she's speaking a lot about doing sequencing and genomic tracing so that we can figure out exactly what we are exposed to here in the United States. So you should start seeing in your communities a huge increase in testing and of course, vaccination. So hopefully things are improving. I just wanted to thank Dr. Franks for adding the information that she's added and to see if there's anything else on the hospital side, Nicole, that you're seeing with COVID-19 and the emergency room side that kind of sticks out that you would want to share. Or definitely, we've talked a lot about the health maintenance issues that are definitely not being addressed during the pandemic.
Yes, the concern that we have is people are still afraid to come to the hospital. And early in the pandemic, we asked you not to come unless you really needed to. And it wasn't just the hospital, but even coming into any medical facility or even long-term care facility. And what really drove that was the unknown ability to protect the patients and the healthcare workers. Well, we have crossed that bridge. We know that our personal protective equipment is effective in protecting transmission from the patient to the healthcare worker or the healthcare worker to the patient. Okay, so it is so healthcare facilities, especially the hospitals, have taken the appropriate precautions to make you safe, as well as our physician offices who are following those recommendations by the CDC. So with that said, we want you to pay attention to what is going on with your health and to not skip steps, to not skip screenings, to not skip appointments. Things may be done a little differently. Telehealth is certainly a tool that has been leveraged during the pandemic that has kept people engaged and made sure that their health is continuing to be followed and managed, but not or waiting and seeing, just like we're waiting to see what's going to happen with the vaccine. That is not going to have the ultimate best outcome for you as an individual. So I just want to encourage everyone to keep up and encourage you to if you're a caretaker of parents or someone else with chronic diseases, to really make sure that they are staying on top of their appointments, staying on top of their preventive health maintenance requirements, because that's what's going to keep you healthy and that's what's going to keep you out of the hospital during this pandemic. What we don't want to see, and what we are seeing, unfortunately, are that people are waiting and they're coming into the hospital sicker than ever. So that's what I really want everyone to take home from me today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Frank. And Dr. Morgan, would you like to wrap up, give us a closing remark about, the vaccine?
Yeah, sure. I think, just following on those remarks by Dr. Franks, the full toll of this COVID pandemic has yet to be known. We know that in this past year, we've had more at-home deaths than we've ever had before. Those deaths have not been recorded as COVID deaths. As Dr. Franks alluded, we don't know if those patients had COVID or if they had other medical conditions that they were delaying treatment and ended up dying at home and not presenting to the hospitals. We know we've seen fewer cardiac patients in the hospital. We don't know, did they get better somewhere? Or are they somewhere sick? Or will the system realize that we really have been over-treating cardiac patients? And when we had a pandemic, we realized we didn't have to give them all these medications, and we don't know. So when this all falls out, we won't know what the real toll is. But I think Dr. Franks makes a great point that we have so many people at home, and we look at cardiac patients, a lot of your symptoms arise from movement. Well, you can easily be pretty sedentary during a quarantine and not elicit any of your symptoms, but be silently getting worse. So we need to think about that. And when we think and encourage our patients to come in, or at least come into for telehealth. And when we think about clinical trials, we need to begin to move our mindset beyond Tuskegee, not ignore Tuskegee or forget about it, but move beyond it, because healthcare is leaving us behind. The best and the brightest thinking that we have in this world in science comes through clinical trials, and we opt out of them. We've got to begin to move from exploitation towards representation when we think about clinical trials and when we think about healthcare and what health equity means for us.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Well, Dr. Morgan, I'm telling you, you are shedding light on such an issue that we have to deal with in our community. Because I'll tell you, I write a ton of prescriptions that were probably not even tested on African Americans, and they probably don't serve us well in the end. So thank you so much. Someone wrote in the chat that Dr. Morgan is connecting the dots of the vaccines in the context of science and our history. Awesome content. Truth and trust will save more lives. So thank you so much.
That's my line sister. She had to say that.
It's so true. It's so very true. And thank you so much, Dr. Franks, and thank you, Dr. Richards, for bringing your experience and your knowledge to the table. We've really benefited a lot tonight. So thanks so much. Well, at this point, we are going to move on to our employment rights discussion. And we're going to give the floor to Attorney Melanie Grant-Jones.
Hi, everyone. You know, this has just been extremely powerful. It wasn't 2 days ago I got a notice to get my annual mammogram, and I literally tore it up. I just said, I'm not going, I'm going to wait. And I just changed my mind. I'm going to make an appointment.
Yay.
Awesome.
This is powerful. It really has.
Bravo.
I appreciate it. I'm stalling because I'm trying to get my share screen going.
Well, make sure it's 3D. Make sure that 3D.
You want me to share? Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
I think I'm sharing. Am I?
You are sharing.
All right, awesome. Well, let's get started. You know, one of the things about employment law, the law really doesn't change. You know, the maxims have been the same pretty much as long as I've been practicing law, particularly when it comes to, you know, when you have a medical issue, what are your rights? I think Dr. Jayne said the landscape is moving quickly, and that's kind of what's happening with employment law. There basically are going to be 4 drivers in terms of what your employee rights are when you return to work or as you continue in the workplace setting. Of course, we know Title VII EEO laws are what protect most of us in the workplace. particularly those of us who work for larger companies. A little different if you work for a mom and pop shop. You know, some of those laws aren't always applicable. But now we're seeing the CDC rules, their pronouncements coming into play. We're also seeing a lot with Biden-Harris policy pronouncements or things that they think they want to do, little inklings that you hear out there about things they're thinking about. Of course, what will drive most of your rights with respect to the vaccination and with respect to when you return to work, how you return to work, under what circumstances, that's going to be medical reasonable accommodation and religious exemption. So I just want to go over these a little bit. I created slides because I don't know, I just feel like we might be able to talk about things and you might be able to see it more clearly. The Biden-Harris administration is thinking about giving more unlimited time off for qualifying illnesses. That will help people who've had COVID, who are recovering from COVID. They won't necessarily lose their jobs or their livelihood. There's also a consideration from the Biden administration about employers providing testing at their workplace when there's an outbreak that exceeds a normal amount. That's not something that's being required right now, but who should bear the burden of a workplace that has an outbreak? Should that be the government that bears that burden, or should that be that company? If they're not practicing safety standards, if they're not abiding by the best practices of the CDC, who should bear that burden? And the Biden administration is moving a little towards saying, maybe the workplaces have to do that. Family First Cares Act, it will expire, but maybe it will be reinstated and even expanded. That's the act that gives benefits to you. Maybe not you, right? Everyone's job affords them different things. If you work for an employer that has more than 500 employees, Family First didn't apply. If you worked for an employer that had less than 50, it didn't apply. The Biden administration is thinking about allowing all of those benefits to apply to everyone. That's leave. That's just help for you if you get in a bind with COVID. A voluntary back hazard pay to essential workers, all those people who were left high and dry when they could not work, did not have the protections they needed, did not feel safe. The Biden administration is thinking about that. And of course, they're thinking about national standards regarding return to work issues. That's not even something the Trump administration acknowledged, that there should be a national standard, but the Biden administration is thinking about that. So what's going to drive whether or not you can refuse the vaccination, whether or not you can refuse returning to work, whether or not you can tell your employer, I don't want to do something with respect to COVID that you think I should do. Maybe you don't want to continue to telework because your home environment is actually the problem for you and you would prefer to be at work. I mean, I have college kids in and out of here, and sometimes I wish I could go over to my job and work and feel a little more comfortable during the day. So how does the reasonable accommodation process work? I'm going to run through this really quickly. I'm assuming that not everybody on this call has ever applied for one, but this will be a driver in terms of whether or not you will be able to say yes or no to your employer and keep your job. What happens is you request a reasonable accommodation. You say, I need something. I don't want to take the vaccination. I need to come back to work. I need a separate office for myself. I need plexiglass to separate me from the customers. Some of these things employers are already doing, but you might have certain things that you want. A big issue is going to be anxiety, mental issues, that it's not something that physically prevents you from coming back into the workplace, but you have fears. Maybe you have high blood pressure. Maybe you are having some type of autoimmune disease. Maybe you've had a lung transplant. I don't know. You don't want to come back, and it's not anything present. It's just a potential fear. You ask for that reasonable accommodation. You're going to have to get your medical documentation in order to move it forward. That is going to be the driver. You're going to have to find a doctor that will support you and say, this employee has this, and therefore they should not take the vaccination. The doctor probably won't go that far, but the doctor will help you establish what you need for the reasonable accommodation process, what you need for your employer to look at you and say, you're right, I should allow you to continue to telework, or you're right, you don't have to take the vaccination. It's all developing. It's a landscape that's moving very quickly, as Jayne said. Nobody really knows. Everything I'm telling you is kind of hypothetical. Is a vaccination going to work? Are we going to get herd immunity? Is it even going to be necessary? All these things are going to play into whether or not, when your employer has you return to work, you will be able to protect yourself in the way you want to protect yourself by asking for an accommodation. Your employer will interact with you, they'll make a decision. They will either grant you a reasonable accommodation, and it does not have to be the one you ask for. So if you ask for full-time telework as a reasonable accommodation because you don't want to come into the office, your employer doesn't have to grant you full-time. They can grant you their accommodation of choice. They may tell you, you have to come to the office 3 days a week, but you can stay home 2 days a week. Your employer might be able to claim undue burden and say, it's just too burdensome for me to accommodate anyone. Think about an assembly line of workers. They're all separating things and they're working right next to each other. And you say, I want a plexiglass shield next to me. And your employer says, oh my gosh, there are 500 people on the assembly line. I can't afford 500 plexiglass divisions. Plus, the assembly line couldn't flow the way it's supposed to flow. I don't know that people on the line have those kinds of jobs, but sometimes it's those hypotheticals that help you understand the dilemma that employers have and the multiple requests. In unusual, very limited amount of circumstances, I think your employer will look for a job for you or fire you if they cannot accommodate you. In the employment realm, we don't see that happening. We've already seen so much cooperation from employers with respect to telework, with respect to giving PPE to people, with respect to flexible schedules. We've seen employers have their staff that don't have to be on site stay home, and the staff that do have to be on site come in. Think about all the range of occupations. I'm thinking primarily office type occupations, because I think that's who we have on the call, but this applies to restaurants as well. This process is all developing. These are all unknowns. I can't even tell you anything definitive, just what we're seeing so far. Many of you are already back at work, but again, what will happen when this is coming to a close, when the vaccination is available? That's when employers are going to start making decisions. There's also going to be an exemption for religion, and I don't really know what that looks like for the vaccination. There are some religious groups that have a very sincere belief that they should not be vaccinated. And as long as you can prove the sincerity of your religious belief, you may be able to avoid coming back to the office, or you may be able to avoid getting the vaccination. You go through the same process. You go through the same interaction between the employer, the employee, their medical records, their religious, their statement of religious sincerity. And then you work to make a decision with the employer about whether or not they will grant you an exemption. Primarily, I think this discussion is going to be about the vaccination. And if the employer claims undue burden, I'm sorry, everyone who works here must be vaccinated. You may have to look for a new job. They may assign you to a job that doesn't require you to be in the workplace, or they may terminate your employment. Undue burden is really just a few things. It's and this whole process revolves around an employer's duty to keep everyone safe in the workplace. And if the employer can't do that, they can claim undue burden. If it's too expensive to do that, they can claim undue burden. That's generally how I see this developing. There's already one law firm in the DC community that has mandated the vaccination if you want to return. They did that the last day of January. I think all of us in the legal community were like, this year can't get any weirder, because Davis Tremaine, an international law firm, said before the vaccination was even available to hardly anyone, you have to have the vaccination to come back to work when we open our doors. We expect other businesses to follow suit. This is a pretty respected law firm. So we expect other businesses to follow suit. I don't know if the federal government will or not. I know for a fact that I will be teleworking full-time until July. And so I don't expect the federal government to even make a pronouncement by then. What I think we're hoping is that, remember those 4 drivers I told you about, the EEO, the CDC? We're hoping the CDC comes out with a very strong pronouncement about the vaccination that provides guidance to all of the companies. But for now, I know you got questions, so I tried to answer them a little bit. Can your employer mandate vaccinations? Probably. They're probably going to claim that they have to do that in order to keep the bulk of the workplace safe. I imagine the entire medical profession will do that. I think that doctors believe it should be done. They believe it will work. They want people who are working in the hospitals to be vaccinated. They were the first group of people to go. So I think that hospitals will definitely mandate that, absent reasonable accommodation and religious exemptions. Can you refuse to be vaccinated? We talked about that earlier. You're going to need a doctor that supports you or a priest that can verify your sincere religious belief. And then can you be fired if you refuse? Possibly. I can't even answer that question. There's no way I can answer it right now. When you return to work, if you're not there already, can your employer take your temperature? Absolutely. Can they administer a COVID test? Absolutely. It's necessary to workplace safety. There's some places where they can't afford to do it. And not every restaurant can afford to administer a COVID test every time you show up. But if you work for someone that wants to do that, more likely than not, you will not be able to refuse taking a COVID test to come in. You will probably not be able to refuse having your temperature taken. But can they administer an antibody test to see if you ever had COVID? According to the EEOC at this point, no. They believe that the antibody test is a medical examination, and the EEOC has not said that employers will be able to conduct a medical examination before you come in the doors. Taking your temperature apparently is not. I'm not a doctor. I don't understand the difference, but there is a distinction. And of course, you can be required to mask social distancing, again, falling back on what the CDC has already said should happen. Can an employer ask if you're positive? Can they ask if you've ever tested positive? Well, they can ask you about your current situation, your present situation, whatever has to do with safety in the workplace. That's how are you feeling today? Do you have symptoms? Are you positive today? But did you have it a month ago? No, they can't really ask you about that because it doesn't have anything to do with protecting the current workers. Can they ask you if a family member is positive or has symptoms? Not really, that violates GINA. Now, if you have someone at home who's currently having symptoms, you can be asked about that. Again, that flows into asking about workplace safety. Am I letting someone come into the building today who may have been exposed this morning at the breakfast table? But the CDC is going to help clarify all of these rules, just not yet. It just hasn't happened yet. I think it will happen. I think that there will be some major pronouncements, but I just don't know when or what they will say. So I have a couple of other slides, but I really wanted to leave time for questions if there are any.
Awesome, Melanie. Such great information. I'll tell you, the question that comes to mind for me, and I believe you answered it somewhat, but I'd just like you to make it clearer for me. As a business owner and someone who employs several certified nursing assistants, I have folks that do shift work, and they are sometimes, following right after one another in someone's home. So I've had a scenario where one person working a shift is COVID positive. They found out, oh, I'm COVID positive. And then I'm in a situation where I don't know who all deserves to know that information. Am I doing something wrong by telling the patient whose home we're in? Am I doing something wrong by telling the other shift members who are following that person up in the home? What rights does that person who's COVID positive have?
So it's really funny. I was reading an article about this very recently. A contractor, your contracting agency can tell your employer that you are positive. So if it's a situation where you have hired this nurse, they work for you, and you've placed them with a family, the employer, I could make a legal argument that that person has a right to know. But as a general rule, it's a need to know basis. And so if you work on the same floor with someone who tests positive, and I'm going to move away from your example because yours is very specific, and I'll get to the general rule, which is it's need to know. So on a general basis, if you work with someone who tests positive, your employer may not tell you who it is. They may not identify that person. They can tell you that it's someone who you may have come into contact with. We've even had a situation where an employee asked if it was someone who might use the same bathroom as me, and we refused that request because it said it was gender specific, and we are giving more information than we need to give. There's going to be a lot of protection over identity of the person who tests positive. I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that you can tell that family, for your safety, I am not going to have, I'm going to have different people come into the home. They're going to deduce it. They're going to figure out who it is. But no, you don't have a right to say they have COVID. Not now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That's very helpful. We have a question in the chat that says, can the COVID vaccine be mandated if it does not have FDA approval yet? I was going to definitely bring that topic up as well, because we have an EUA versus the VLA.
So,
Correct.
Dr. Jayne, that's why we were all perplexed in the legal community when David Wright said they're going to mandate it. You know, there's so many things that have happened differently with this emergency order, and no one has had to answer that question yet. No one has, there isn't enough vaccine yet for an employer to even mandate it. I don't know what is going to happen. Certainly if it becomes FDA approved, without a doubt. But will the Biden administration put forth some other type of executive order that says it can be mandated, even though it's an emergency use vaccination? We don't know yet. That's something that's being talked about. We're all laughing at this law firm because they've said, yes, we're going to mandate it. And that's the first thing that popped into all of our minds. It's not even approved. But I think they're forcing the issue. This is a lobbying law firm in DC too. So I think they're forcing the issue. I bet they represent pharmaceuticals.
Excellent. Great information. We so appreciate you being with us this evening. Definitely, as things move forward and we're all required to go back to work, or being pressured in some way to go back to work, I think you'll get quite a few phone calls at your law firm.
I do want to make one thing very clear, if I could, and I meant to say this, and I know we're short on time. If you are looking for a job, there are very specific rules about whether or not you can be asked if you have COVID, whether or not you can be asked if you've ever had it, or whether or not you can be tested. You have to get a first offer. You must have a conditional offer before that inquiry could start. It's the same as if you're pregnant. They can't talk with you about anything until they give you an offer. And then those issues can come up. So as we're looking for new jobs, as we're moving around, don't let them ask you. They can't. Report it if they do. That's something we're very worried about. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Such valuable information. We so appreciate you participating tonight, and we're very fortunate to have you as a blue elephant. So I just wanted to read a few things in the chat for Dr. Morgan that were mentioned, and there was a mentioning of DREF. All of Us research program aims to encourage participation of African Americans in clinical trials and biomedical research. This is via an award from NIH. Did you have any comment on that, Dr. Morgan? I can't hear you, Jayne.
So I said, I'm sorry, I don't, and I wasn't understanding you that well. So maybe I'll read the comment.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Where's the comment? It says, what time did the comment come in?
Oh, it was quite a ways back.
Oh, okay. So
But
maybe
it
tell me what.
said DREF, DREF, All of Us Research Program aims to encourage participation of African Americans in clinical trials and biomedical research.
Mhm.
This is via an award from NIH.
Okay. So I think what they're responding to is somebody asked, where we would find out about clinical trials, and they're saying, don't forget about this program. So
Okay.
the great
Then there
reminder.
was one more statement. It's important to closely review informed consent for clinical trials. As participants, you still have the right to opt out of portions of a study you deem uncomfortable.
Yeah, and so always remember that just because a trial is available, you may not qualify. There are specific criteria called inclusion criteria, and there's another set of criteria called exclusion criteria. So for inclusion criteria, you've got to meet everything that they want. And for exclusion criteria, you can't have any of the things that they don't want. So you may not qualify for the trial. The other point is, you may decide once you're in the trial that you don't want to be in the trial. You want to withdraw, and you can withdraw voluntarily at any time for any reason. So I'm assuming that that's what that comment is about, that, read your informed consent. Even if you sign that informed consent, which you'll sign the informed consent saying you understand, you can still withdraw at any time from any trial for any reason. You can literally just not show up again. We call you lost to follow up. That's what you be noted in the documentation, lost to follow up. So you absolutely have the right to do as you please within the trial. Yeah.
Excellent. I think we're going to have issues with pregnant women being vaccinated, even though from what I've read, 15,000 pregnant healthcare workers have already been successfully vaccinated. Unfortunately, pregnant women were not included in the trials. I understand for neither Moderna nor Pfizer. Is that correct, Dr. Morgan?
So yes and no. So we talk about those inclusion and exclusion criteria. Pregnancy was definitely an exclusion criteria. You could not go into that trial pregnant, and you were not supposed to get pregnant during the trial. But life happens. So Moderna ended up with 13 pregnant patients after the first dose, and Pfizer ended up with 23 pregnant patients after the dose. So in total, we have 36 pregnant patients who ended up in the trial. And they are being followed to the end. These are unintentional. We call them unintended pregnancies, meaning the companies did not intend the pregnancy, not the patients. They're called, so there are 36 unintended pregnancies that are being followed all the way out to full-term delivery. And so far, there have been absolutely, no deleterious effects whatsoever. But don't forget, we're talking about within a group of 70,000 people. So this is a very small cohort, and it's an unintended cohort. We didn't want to have this cohort, but there it is. So it is giving us some good information on these patients.
Excellent. I think that the recommendation is such that pregnant women and lactating women should be vaccinated.
Right. So the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the CDC have moved forth with those recommendations. The World Health Organization was the last holdout, and they were not in agreement. But as we say, it's a changing landscape. They have changed their position in the last week and are also in agreement with both ACOG, the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and the CDC.
Excellent.
Yeah.
As well as those with autoimmune and other immunocompromised medical conditions should be vaccinated.
Right.
Right. I've often gotten questions about my family member has lupus or they have cancer. Should they be vaccinated? And the yes is the answer.
The answer is yes. And don't forget, these groups were not studied, but they were also not excluded. So the immunocompromised patients, we have all those HIV patients that were in there. There were lupus patients in there. They were not excluded. They were not studied, they were also not excluded from the trial, right?
Excellent, excellent. We have a question in the chat that, are you able to provide any information regarding when or if the vaccine may be offered for school-age children and teens?
So those types of studies are called bridging down studies. So initially we do trials in adults. And so for Moderna, that was ages 18 and up. And then Pfizer did 18 and up, and then also included some 16 and 17-year-olds. And that's why it has approval for ages 16 and up, and Moderna only has approval for 18 and up. Bridging down means that the trials have all been completed in adults. These trials are not specific to children. And that we can now extend the trial down generally by 3 years to that next age group. So generally then we look at 15 to 18-year-olds. And then after that, we look at 12 to 15-year-olds. And after that, 9 to 12, on down, 6 to 9. And that's called bridging down, where all of the data is available. And now we just need to look at these increasingly younger populations. As you can imagine, the younger the child becomes, the harder it is to get them enrolled into a trial. The harder it is for parents to enroll their children into trials. And so you can understand that, especially a trial that involves needles. So that being said, Pfizer has just completed its trial of, I think, 3,000. I may be wrong. I need to look at that. Ages 12 to 16. And Moderna also is at some stage of completing its trial, and it went all the way down to age 12 as well. So it's looking at 2 cohorts, 12 to 15 and 15 to 18. That data, I imagine, I do not know, but I imagine that they will wait and have that data come out under FDA and not emergency use authorization. So it may be another year or so before we know for sure. Again, landscape is changing. So if it comes out in 2 months, don't come back and say to me, but I would imagine that we will get full FDA approval on these children's vaccines before they move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Morgan. And we're going to move on to our mental health section with Laura Morse.
Hi, I am Laura, and I am a professional counselor in Atlanta, Georgia, in private practice. I've been in practice for a little over 20 years. And so we don't have a lot of time left. I think what I would like to do is just kind of give an overview of why it is really important to take care of our mental health. I think that as professional women, we are used to doing for others in excess, being successful in business, being successful in our families, being successful in our communities. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of interpersonal strength and resolve. And I think if I've learned anything through this pandemic is that many things and institutions and people have been exposed in very vulnerable ways. And I think that it is no exception to the reason why we are talking so strongly about mental health at this stage. This has been the busiest year of my life professionally. And so while financially that is a really great thing for me, it has been incredibly painful at times, to be really honest, to listen to the countless number of stories of people in extreme grief, extreme fear, extreme anxiety, extreme depression. I think what's mostly disheartening is that for my clients of color, feeling like even with a pandemic and even with all of the racial unrest, they still have a sense of shame about seeking help for mental health support. And so I've always found, since I've started this cause, this profession, that it was my duty to be able to talk with others in a way that was open and inviting and hopefully supportive, to destigmatize mental health care, wellness, and services. And so my practice now, even with a lot of more attention being placed on mental health and what's available and what is needed, I still find it really, really necessary to help people take very small steps towards seeking care. And so as you can imagine, you know, if we're going to generalize feelings or situations where people are coming to me for, you can imagine that they might say, I've been feeling really panicked. I'm having a hard time sleeping lately. My blood pressure has gone up. I can't stop thinking at night. What could this be? What does this mean? And we're talking about topics such as anxiety. We're talking about depression in a way that is beyond what is generally known. It's one thing to kind of have an idea what depression looks like or what anxiety looks like. It's another thing to actually experience it and to feel it so deeply that it really shakes your core. And when people are in a place of pain and discomfort, it's hard to know which way to turn, and it's really, really hard to ask for help and go through a lot of barriers. So one of the things I appreciated so much about the Black doctors that I know, and I'll just shout out my line sister, Nicole, because that's what line sisters do. They shout out their line sisters, and then I think Hillary's on as well, and Leah, is that I know my line sisters to say, hey, if you have a concern about X, let's say I've called Dr. Nicole and say my blood pressure is up. She's not going to tell me you just need to go get some medicine and leave me alone. She's going to talk, Laura, what is this about? Let me ask you what kind of food you're having. I remember a long time ago, I did have a question about my blood pressure, and she made me open up the pantry and tell her what was in it. And I had a lot of canned vegetables, and she said, there's too much sodium in there. Why don't you try that? Why don't you try to exercise? Why don't you see before you do these other things? And so for mental health, I want to say to you all and to encourage your family members, please don't wait till you feel like you're in crisis. What I have learned with my clients of color is that we can wait until we are in extreme duress before we will seek help. If you know that things are just not getting better, you could use a little bit of extra support, or you feel like you have tapped out your networks as far as your family members or your friends, call a professional. The one great thing about care nowadays is that we can get it from our employer through our employee assistance. We can go to betterhelp.com, which is more affordable. We can look on Psychology Today and find different resources, Black Girls Therapy, Black Men Heal. There are a lot of different resources that are available. It's more than about what is affordable and what would be a good fit. If you have questions about, well, where do I go? How do I, who do I need? What kind of provider do I need? You can start with your primary care doctor. I think a lot of primary care doctors are doing an excellent job of doing basic inventories, talking to their patients about how to seek mental health care. But if not, the Google is a great tool now. I mean, you can say depression, and you could put in your area or zip code, and so many different resources will pop up. And if not, find a professional that you trust just to ask basic questions. You know, I have a lot of friends and I have a lot of family, and sometimes people will want to ask me general things, and I never mind sharing information. However, that is different than actually becoming somebody's therapist. That is a totally different relationship. I think what makes a therapeutic bond so important is that when a client comes into my office or my virtual office, they don't owe me anything. They can say whatever they need to say. I can hear it. They don't have to worry about, am I boring her? Am I scaring her? Am I, talking in a way that is not going to be understood or respected? It's different than when you might talk to a friend or a family member. And so I'm just wanting to say that, generally speaking, that if you've ever considered it, or you know family or friends that could utilize some additional mental health or wellness, please encourage them to seek it out and not feel afraid of that process.
Laura, those are some excellent points. Thank you so much. I think that I would definitely like to read what's in the chat, and that is, according to the CDC, life expectancy decreased by 1 year due to COVID-19, and take time to take care of yourself. I think that that is such an important point. I would just like to echo everything that you said, and more importantly, add that being stressed and not feeling well and not feeling yourself during this pandemic is normal. It is normal. And I think sometimes isolation can make us feel like we're the only ones, feeling so bad, feeling so down, feeling, sorry a little bit for ourselves. I mean, this is a difficult dynamic across the board. I find myself grieving for all the 500,000 people that have died. I know a few of them, but I mean, it's just a heavy burden to be in the midst of such loss across the board.
Yes, thank you so much for saying that. Grief is going to come in waves. And I think that for all of us who have lost someone in our lives before COVID, we understand that our process might be similar, but it is still very unique to us. Grief can be triggered through different experiences. And so what I'm seeing now through COVID is that a lot of people are very much reminded of times that they have lost people that were very close to them. And if they have lost someone recently because of COVID, it is traumatic to hear more stories every time you turn on the news, or you log on to social media. There's somebody that has lost somebody, and it is painful. And so there might be a time where you're feeling a little bit numb, and if you are, it's really our psyche way of trying to protect ourselves, but after a while, that numbness can become unhealthy. There are other ways in which we can try to detach or to numb ourselves from pain or compassion fatigue, and we have to be mindful of those. That can include excessive alcohol or recreational drug use, eating, and other things that can create problems down the road. So we need to be mindful. And so to your point about stress and our life expectancy, is how do we take care of ourselves? And I think that that's a unique question, an answer for everyone. But what I would want to tell you, or to stress, is that we need to be very intentional about taking care of ourselves, very purposeful about it, meaning we know that we are worth being cared for. And if we can't find it from others, we can always find it within. And so I would just, no loving act is too small if it's a loving act, right? Resting is a part of self-care, right? Sleeping is a part of self-care. Taking a break. And one thing I will again stress, because I will tell you this is a theme that has come up from beginning to now, is boundaries. What are your interpersonal boundaries? And when I say that, I mean, how do you take time to give yourself emotional or physical space from people, from work, from the news? What does your boundary look like? If you were going to imagine drawing, if somebody said, I need you to draw a physical representation of what your boundaries look like, would it be a tall wall that is made of iron? Would it be an electric fence that nobody could see? Would it be a sign that says wide open, come on in? I mean, you really need to think about what that looks like. And for sometimes many people, especially with our families, with our community, we're like, we don't want to have those boundaries. We want to be accessible, especially for women who are used to taking care of others and other people. But you can burn out. And this is a time with so much stress and duress that it is really easy to burn out. So I just encourage you to be very intentional and mindful about how you take care of yourself.
Awesome information. Thank you so much. And we have someone in the chat, Dr. Timo said, include the demand of wife, mom, and working professionals. And I definitely would like to stress, that the boundaries have definitely been blurred in the time of the pandemic, with many people working from home. I think you really have to set boundaries and create a routine and schedule in order not to just lose sight of, boundaries, basically. And So I appreciate, did you want to add anything more to that, Laura?
No, I just thought that Melanie asked me if these golf clubs in the background were for my self-care, if I was using those. Actually, they're my husband's, and I'm mad that they are back here because that is not feng shui at all. And this is my home office, so my clients are like, what is that? But what I will tell you is that he knew that golf was going to pretty much carry him through. He lost his father to an expected, or to an illness, a long-term illness, but we lost our father in June. And I know that golf for him was a respite, right? And I thought about, like, what is my respite? My respite was going to the beach and vacation and hanging out with line sisters and going to brunch. Well, guess what? I can't do that. So as easily, right, as he might be able to golf. And so I had to backtrack and figure out what else can I do instead of what can I not do, right?
Awesome. That's very valuable information. I think we are worth the time it takes for us to sit down and make sure that we're doing all the things that you've mentioned. We have to know our value, even at home. Know our value at home and at work. So thank you so much, Laura. We just so appreciate you being here tonight and sending us this message to take care of ourselves and to reach out for help if we need it. And to know that we are normal when we don't feel quite well during this pandemic. So thanks so much. So we're going to have our poll now. Or we're going to wrap things up, but I will let Melanie take over from here.
Hi, this has been amazing. Hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that. I had to have two laptops going because I was having internet issues. This has been amazing. It's actually been more informative than I thought. Dr. Jayne, I have admired you for years, and you just did an absolutely awesome job. I think that, I wrote down some things you said, optimal versus maximal, and that was very powerful. And I, for one, my father was in a couple of trials out at Emory related to diabetes drugs years ago, and I never really thought about it in terms of things like this. So thank you for sharing. I think Nicole or someone talked about the importance of the messenger, and now I think that we can all be very good messengers because we can take a lot of what you said, a lot of what has been said by everyone tonight, and share it with other people. I was one of those people who at first I was very adamant that I wasn't going to take it until it was out for 5 years. Then I swung back and said, okay, I need to take it because I'm not going to stay in my house for 5 years. And then I heard a couple of things about how it changed your DNA and all these other things. And so now I'm a lot more comfortable. And so I will say thank you. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of this conversation I started because it was selfish. I wanted to know, and I didn't want to have to burden my doctor with all these questions. So this 2 hours has been very helpful. Desi, if you can go ahead and launch the survey, and also if you can drop Dr. Morgan's social media handles in the, if you can share that screen, if you can drop it in the chat as well. I will tell you, I purposefully did not listen to all of her Stairwell Chronicles because I wanted a lot of this information to be new tonight. So I look forward to going back and listening to some of those, Jayne, and starting to stay on top of them. So, this is, I've been texting my line sisters tonight saying HK is just bad. And, I am so honored to be part of this sisterhood. There are only women on the call tonight, even though we did have some men to sign up. But it just goes back to the fact that as women, we are leaders. We take this information and we share it. I definitely want to reinforce what Laura was saying about self-care. I was one of those victims of just taking on so much for everybody. And last year I started crashing. I was watching the news consistently. And at some point I just had to stop. And so, I took a vacation. I went somewhere, and even though I really couldn't do anything, I basically stayed in the condo and went to the beach. it was still taking some time away. So I certainly encourage everyone on this line. I'm looking at the list of the people, or the participants, and I know y'all. Y'all are leaders. You probably have 3 or 4 titles in addition to raising kids and being married and going to school and all these things. So let's just commit to ourselves to do something good for ourselves this week. Get a massage, do something. But for the most part, I really just want to thank Dr. Morgan. This has been outstanding. We are very lucky to have you. Everyone who's been on the panel, thank you for the time that you put into this. My namesake, my line sister Melanie, reasonable accommodation. I hadn't even thought about that as a means, that needs to be addressed, and I have to think about that myself as an employer. So thank you very much. I'm going to throw it back to Nicole, and then we will, let's see, the poll will be open for 2 more minutes, and we'll share the results of the poll. So thank you, everyone. It's important for us to understand how valuable this is. So if we look to do this again in another setting, on another topic, in a few years, in a few months, whatever, we'll know whether or not this has been impactful. So thank you very much. Nicole?
Awesome. Melanie, I just want to thank you for, opening up the door for this, for creating an opportunity for me to say yes to making this presentation, and just so excited to be a part of this Spelman sisterhood, this Delta Sigma Theta sisterhood, and Eta Kappa just being so awesome and just always continuing to just pour into my life. I want to thank my non-line sisters that are on this call, because that's how Wall Street rolls. We stick together. We always been down like that since spring '90. So just want to thank you all, family members, for showing up tonight. And I hope that you will take everything that Dr. Morgan, who we are so grateful. Just thank you so much, Dr. Morgan, for your knowledge, for just your passion, and just bringing it. And I think we all have a different conviction about this vaccine after hearing you speak. I want to thank Dr. Franks for taking the time, because these are busy people. You said that right, Melanie. We have some heavy hitters in HK and a Spelman grad. I want to thank Dr. Richards, who had surgery recently, and she still showed up. And thank my line sister Laura for always bringing the noise, bringing the information, bringing the passion, bringing the love. And we just so appreciate you all for being here.
All right.
And Melanie Grant Jones, I have not met you, but I'm just so excited now that I do know you, and I know that you're so smart and helpful, and just glad to know that you're part of this sisterhood with me as well. So thank you too.
Yes, and can we just get Desi to read off the results of the poll?
Yes, so I'm currently sharing the results. You should be able to see it on your screen. If you're not able to see it, we had almost not almost, exactly 100% of respondents saying that the information presented today was helpful. So yeah, thank you to all of our panelists for sharing such wonderful and insightful information with us today. Out of the people who were undecided or not planning to take the vaccine prior to today's conversation, we had 7% say that they strongly agree that they had changed their mind because of the information presented today. 22% say that they agree that the presentation changed their mind about the COVID vaccine. 4% say that they were neutral, and 67% said that they had already decided or have already taken the vaccine. And the last question, we had 81% of respondents say that they strongly agree that today's presentation addressed their questions and concerns regarding the vaccine, and the remaining 19% said that they agree with that statement. So overall, it's been a really great a really excellent and informative conversation that we've had today. And I'll speak for myself, and the numbers speak for themselves as well. We all really appreciate you all sharing your insight on this topic.
And one last thing, I do have to put in a plug, or my BD director will fuss at me tomorrow. If you'd like to learn any more about Veritas Management Group and how we can support community conversations like this, please feel free to contact me. I'm in the Facebook, I'm on the Facebook Ada Kappa page, and I'll also drop my information. We're at veritasmanagementgroup.com. So thank you so much. If you want to hang around and just kind of hang out for a while, that's, you feel free to do that. But the recording will stop now and the event is officially over. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, Melanie, I gotta say one more shout out to my number, Pam Cook, your sister, because I wouldn't probably be on this call if it weren't for Pam on Facebook saying my number can be involved. So thanks so much, number.
Positive peer pressure.
Right.
And, yeah. And one shout out to my aunt Wavona Ward. She is supporting us on this call, and she's one of the people who inspired me to want to have this conversation, because we were talking about it around Christmas, and I just didn't feel like I could give her adequate advice. So thank you, Aunt Vone, for showing up. Sarah, Aunt Vone, and we love you. And everybody have a good evening.
All right.